Tonight on The Computer History Museum presents Revolutionaries.
If you think of the two industries that have changed people's lives, I think perhaps more than any other, is the auto industry and the computer industry.
Bill Ford has been a vocal advocate for what he calls the democratization of technology in the 21st century automobile. On the week that his company opened its first lab in Silicon Valley, Bill came to the museum for a personal discussion of Ford's future, green technology, and the cars of tomorrow. Major funding for Revolutionaries is provided by the Intel Corporation.
You know, as I was walking around, it struck me, if you think of the two industries that have changed people's lives, I think perhaps more than any other, is the auto industry and the computer industry. And I mean, and we'll get into how they're coming together now, but for most of our lives, they were completely separate. You know, prior to the Model T, most people never traveled more than 25 miles from home in their entire lifetime, and which is an incredible stat. And then you think it really allowed people, the automobile, to choose where they lived, where they worked, where they played, in a way that they never could before. And then you think of the computer industry and everything it has done to help our quality of life in every discipline you could possibly think of. It's really interesting. And as you know, we have the Ford Museum in Dearborn, which celebrates innovation. And here you are with this magnificent place that celebrates innovation.
One of the great museums in the world, as a matter of fact.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a very cool place.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of an interesting place to start, Bill. Because that museum represents a kind of the Ford legacy over more than a century. And I wanted to talk to you about your thoughts as a Ford and how gratifying it is to you that after all these years, a Ford is still the chairman of Ford.
Well, I think it sets us apart from other companies. We're not just another big, nameless, faceless corporation. I mean, my family's name is on our products, and that means a lot to me and to my family. But it's interesting. We're a family company, but it's not just my family. We have a lot of second, third, fourth, even fifth and sixth generation employees working at Ford, and that's also kind of unique. And so. If you've just dialed back a few years and you look at the extremely difficult times that our industry went through in 06, 07, 08, and 09, when GM and Chrysler went bankrupt, I mean, I'll go to my grave believing that it was our employees and how much they really care and love our company that pulled us through. It's a culture that I'm so proud of, and it really is we're a very big company, but we feel like a family company, and I love that.
And how different is Ford today from the Ford that you joined as chairman in 1988? Oh,
it's completely different. I mean, it is different in a lot of ways. I mean, if I can start at maybe a very personal level. When I joined the board in 1988, I was already very outspoken about environmental issues. And I was quickly told to stop associating with any known or suspected environmentalist now that I was joining the board. And, and the term eco-freaks was thrown around a lot. And it was I was literally viewed as kind of a green Bolshevik, if you will. But, and we viewed environmental issues as compliance issues and regulatory issues, and we would do nothing more than we had to do. And I just saw that as an absolute train wreck of a policy. At the end of the day, we were going to lose a whole generation of prospective employees and car buyers if we didn't change radically our approach to that. So that was the Ford that I really entered into in 1979 when I came out. I went to Princeton undergrad, and then I went to MIT graduate school, came back to Detroit, and that was the culture that existed. And so it was incredibly frustrating to me and enormously disappointing that was the wisdom of the day, if you will. And I really vowed to change it. There were a lot of times when I almost left the company. And had a lot of conversations late in the evening with my friends and my wife saying, well, why am I doing this? I'm completely out of step with everybody else here. But I gradually came to believe, with their help, that I could affect change a lot more from within than if I went out and did something else. But it was so that was one element that was true then and is completely different today, thank goodness. The other was that we were a series of small companies that added up to a big company. We had Ford of Europe. We had Ford Asia Pacific. We had Ford South America. We had Ford North America. And they had nothing to do with each other. The product lines were completely different. The way we developed vehicles were very different. And as a result, we had no economy of scale and no synergy. Today, that's all changed. I mean, we now are on global platforms. The SUV that we're introducing here, the new Escape, is the same as in Europe. It'll be the same in Asia. The Fusion, the Focus, same in Asia, same in Europe, same in South America. I mean, across the board, and that's very different. So then you say, well, who cares? What does that do for you? Well, what that does is it allows us to have a much quicker product cadence than we ever could have before, because rather than developing a vehicle 5 times or 4 times around the world, we're doing it once, and we can freshen it much faster. So we're very different in that regard, and we're not so inward looking. We were the most insular industry I think I've ever seen. We were in Detroit. We were an insular industry in an insular town, and we all told each other how great we were. And you'd go out in the evenings and you'd see somebody that was associated with the auto industry, and they'd pat you on the back and tell you how wonderful you were. Meanwhile, we weren't so wonderful. That's changed dramatically. And I think part of the proof is our opening our office here. And we can get into it, just kind of the way we're operating, the technology we're employing, the partners we're dealing with now really have broken us out of our insularity.
And what role, now that you've made this transition to the kind of company that can produce one car around the world, what's the role that these major advances in technology has played as you brought them into Ford?
Well, it's interesting. If I can turn the clock back to 2006, because that sort of will tell you exactly where we're headed. In 2006, our industry was about to fall off a cliff. And we had just borrowed $23 billion, which, that number, you can imagine the conversation I had with my family when I said, guess what, we just borrowed $23 billion, and to do that, we had to mortgage the Blue Oval, which for us was our heritage and everything else.
Which you literally did.
We literally mortgaged the Blue Oval, yes. But if I can go back to that time, the reason I mention it, though, is that we had a discussion, Alan Mullally and I, in my living room, where we said, there's no point in doing all this if there isn't light at the end of the tunnel. Mm-hmm. And therefore, we took a very strong point of view on 2 things that we're seeing happen today. One is we said, we want to be the fuel economy leader in every segment that we play in. Well, that for Ford was, we were so far from that it seemed like a pipe dream. The second was we wanted to be the technology leader in our industry. Again, that was not something we were known for, really by any of our buying public. So, and the other part of all that was, as our competitors during this time were slashing and burning, we actually doubled down on these areas. And so, so what does this technology look like? Well, if you look at the powertrains, it's the electrification of our fleet. But it's interesting. We're doing it differently than our competitors are. They're doing a single vehicle that is, just an electric vehicle. We chose to do something different, and I think much more in keeping with our heritage of democratizing technology. And that is that we thought that it was important to give our customers what we call the power of choice. So we're electrifying our mainstream products. So for instance, the Focus, which is being built in Michigan, coming down the same line, you've got a pure electric, you've got a plug-in electric, you've got a hybrid, and you have what we call our EcoBoost engine. And so the customers will tell us what the true demand for all these are, and we can flex up or flex down depending upon what they're asking us to do. Rather than building a single vehicle, because we've been there before. If that doesn't sell, now what do? You have to throw incentives at it, and that destroys the value of the product, or you have to close your facility or mothball it, and obviously no one wants to do that. So we took a different approach than our competitors. So we have technology going into the powertrain. We still have, and we can get into this, all the different fuels that we're working with, from hydrogen to all the biofuels, natural gas. But importantly, we're also, it's a technology that we're celebrating here in the museum, that we partner with Microsoft on sync technology to bring initially entertainment into vehicles. But then quickly there were safety aspects that were added onto it. And it's an open platform. And it was a great decision because people are developing apps against it. And we've got them, as I say, in 4 million vehicles now. And so that really established us as a leader in that area. And looking forward, and which is what I love to do, I don't like to look backwards. I love to look forward. And I think you mentioned a family company. I think if we do this well, one of the advantages we can have about being a family company is we can look forward and know that there's going to be continuity. Because often what happens is with new management coming in, each new management has to have a new strategy and a new point of view, and everything's torn up and you start over again. But I believe that a lot of the value that I can bring to our company is to make sure that we set this course and that we stick with it. And a large part of that is the technology roadmap. Because if you think of the automobile as it is today, it's going to change radically in the next 20 to 30 years. And it has to, because the world is changing. Right now, there are 7 billion people that live on the planet, and there are about 1 billion cars. And by mid-century, though, if you believe the futurists, we're going to be at 9 billion people and 4 billion cars. Well, where are they going to go? We're going to have global gridlock, and it's not going to work. And it's not going to work in these mega cities that are going to exist by mid-century.
In fact, this was one of the main themes that you sounded in Barcelona, wasn't it?
It is, because I asked for help from all the tech companies that were there to help us figure this out. I mean, we can't do it unilaterally. We can play a large role in it. But it's really going to require the application of technology in a way we've never seen. Vehicle-to-vehicle technology, vehicle-to-infrastructure technology. It's going to require, ultimately, every form of transportation. Private cars, buses, trains, subways, pedestrians, all linked in a seamless network, if we're really going to optimize people moving around a city. And the notion of car ownership is going to change, too. But yeah, I think that technology's role today is really important, but it's only a fraction of what it's going to be in the future.
I want to dig in a little bit to those themes that you sounded in Barcelona and talk about each one bit by bit. So you've been widely quoted as talking about the car as the next mobile platform. And I think some people that I've talked to when I've used that phrase tend to hear it as an entertainment sort of phrase, as opposed to something much more deep and fundamental, which is how I understand you're using it. So talk about that transformation of the car as a mobile platform and things like, for example, vehicle-to-vehicle technology and how it's going to address some of these congestion problems.
Well, I mean, first of all, let me start, there is no silver bullet. I mean, there's not going to be one bit of technology that we're going to wake up and figure out that it's solved. I mean, obviously there's things like autonomous driving and semi-autonomous driving that will all help. But if you think of each city in the world starting with a different infrastructure, one size won't fit all. And they'll all have different technologies, and the capability to adopt those technologies will be different around the world. But if you think of the vehicle being able to talk to other vehicles around them, right now there are 1 billion vehicles on the road, and there's a lot of computing power in those vehicles. But they're single entities. They're not connected at all. So what if those 1 billion computers can start talking to the other computers? And what if those vehicles and that connected group of vehicles can now talk to the infrastructure around it? Pretty soon, you start mapping out optimal traffic flows. You'll be able to get much denser driving. You'll be able to get much denser parking as self-parking comes into being. All these things, none of them, again, are a silver bullet, But they're all important to start to deal with the new reality of the world that is going to just be awfully crowded.
So does that mean when I drive into a parking lot, I will immediately get a map that will say there's an empty space for you up on the 3rd floor?
Yeah, well, better than that.
I'll be there for you.
Better than that, when you leave home, your car will be able to reserve you a spot at that parking lot, so you don't even have to think about it there. And then you'll get out and your car will park itself. And that will be pretty cool.
That will be pretty cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really interesting, because if the whole notion of a car is to make people's lives easier and better, and that's what I believe it is. I mean, it's, you know, people often say to me, well, you're a car and truck company. Well, yeah, we are today. And I suspect we'll always be making some version of cars and trucks. But really, we're a mobility company whose job is to make people's lives better. And that will be, that'll look quite different in the not too distant future than it does today.
Do you see, what other advantages do you see or potential do you see in this whole concept of connected cars?
Well, I mean, there's almost no limit. I mean, if you start connecting to the cloud, you know, now you start bringing in, you know, cloud computing and cloud voice and a lot of things that, you know, that we built a concept car called the Evos, which is, you know, and it can do everything. It can check your blood pressure, your blood sugar. It can monitor your entire, you know, how you're doing that day, as well as all the functions in a vehicle, because it's all connected to the cloud. So, and I know there are privacy issues and a lot of things we have to work through. And frankly, in all this new technology, there's stuff we have to work through. I mean, there's liability issues when we start talking about autonomous driving. I mean, there are all these, you know, you think about cities. We may have all this great technology, but if there's been no urban planning and no policies put into place, I mean, it's going to really not work. So there's a lot of moving parts to all of this. But I think it's almost limitless in terms of what we can do. But there's a key element to this. And we have to make it user-friendly. It has to be something that a customer values and understands how to use. Because we can load as much technology as you, I mean, you know, I think of my mother, I mean, you know, beyond turning on the radio, she freaks out. And I get that. So we have to make cars as intuitive as turning on the radio. Because if you don't, you're going to leave more and more people behind, and we don't want to do that.
Vehicle to vehicle that you were talking about a moment ago wouldn't necessarily require anything from me, would it? My car was just going to simply communicate?
Exactly, but it'll give you real-time information. So like if there's a vehicle ahead of yours in traffic, and it sends a signal back to your vehicle that, hey, there's been an accident on, you know, on 280, and I know you're behind me, you might want to reroute. So your car might ask you, do you want me to reroute? There's been an accident ahead, do you want me to reroute you? And that'll be real-time as opposed to, you know, the lags that we have today. So it won't require anything necessarily onerous of you, but it will interact with you.
And then one of the other things I know that you're talking about, and actually you're doing right now, is extracting data. These cars are collecting data continually. Yeah. And you're starting to take that, analyze it, and get all kinds of additional research.
You know, there's so much data out there that isn't collected. There's so many sensors out there in the world that aren't, you know, where the data is. And there are companies now, a lot of whom are being born here in Silicon Valley, who are starting to collect the data and put it in usable form so that, and it's not just for mobile users, but certainly cars are one customer for that. And yeah, it's amazing how much data is out there. The question is, how much is, you know, how can it be put in a form that's usable?
There's one fascinating example that I was reading about, which is starting to collect data on people who are driving your electric vehicles and learning about when they charge, what time of day, the time of day they charge, what you might be learning about them because they're charging during the middle of the day as opposed to in the evening.
Right.
How much they're topping up as opposed to letting the battery go all the way down, that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of that's, you know, people are freaking out with the new technology. And I think as they get more comfortable and as range expands, you'll see less people, you know, being, you know, so frantic to top up. But one of the apps we've developed is to allow people to know when the best charging time is. Because, you know, if you're charging at night at your house, your rate's going to be a lot cheaper than if you're charging midday. And so we're working with the utilities to really have an interactive system so the customer will always know when the optimal time for them to charge is.
When you talk about this bundle of technology, How are you going to help consumers like us get our heads around all of this, both the possibilities and just the challenges of it?
Well, if you start with the notion that I said a moment ago, that the whole point of this is to make people's lives better, if they don't perceive it as that, they're going to turn away and say, forget it. And we've seen examples of that in our industry where a few years ago, one of our competitors introduced a car with so much technology that somebody would drive up to a valet car park, and then that was the end. The person couldn't drive it away. It was, and in the end, there was a real rebellion against that. I think we all learned a lot from that, that technology for its own sake is not something particularly appealing. The other thing I would say is our customers are becoming so used to technology in their daily lives. I mean, really, if you think of it, a car should really be a seamless transition between what they're doing at the office, what they're doing at home, and then in the car. And to that extent, you know, the car has really been the laggard. I mean, and all we're doing now is bringing the car up to what they're doing with the rest of their life. But there's a key element in all this, and you all have read about it, it's driver distraction. The last thing we want to do, we have a very firm policy at Ford that we want your hands on the wheel and your eyes on the road. And that's why we're doing a lot with voice. Because you know, you can load a lot of technology into a vehicle, but ultimately, if the driver is fooling around or trying to figure stuff out, you know, it's trouble. It's just like texting. I mean, it's, you know, we obviously don't want that, but we also don't want them playing with their technology when they should be looking at the road. So we're really encouraging voice as a way to get around that.
There's quite a bit of voice out there now. Are you finding we really want our cars to talk to us, and we really want to talk to our cars?
I have friends who swear at their voice a lot, and I guess it beats swearing at your spouse. But I think people have varying levels. The nice thing is, if you don't want it, you don't have to use it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, you know, and that's, I think, the whole notion of technology going forward is, you think about cloud computing, and some people are going to be nervous about, you know, allowing their data in the cloud, and we're working very hard on privacy. But I think it's also important that we have opt-in kind of availability too, so customers can opt in to the extent that they're comfortable with it, or not. And you know, and a lot of people won't. Hey, look, there's still a lot of people who just want to turn on the radio and cruise down the road, and that's absolutely fine. And for those people, and often I'm one of those people. For me, it's a great way to unwind, is just to kind of not deal with the cell phone, not deal with technology for a little bit, and drive a car and listen to some good music. I mean, that to me is a blast. But there are times when I want that capability, and when I want it, it's there.
I want to go back to that moment in 2006 when you and Alan Mullally were sitting in a very casual setting, and you had to make these two decisions. Could have been any two decisions. You could have picked something besides fuel economy and technology as the linchpins for your future. What was it about what you knew about technology, mobility, these congestion issues you've been talking about and so forth, at that moment that made you say, out of everything else you might have chosen, a really intelligent vehicle of the future was a key?
I wish I could tell you I was that foresighted back then. I wasn't. Where it really was born of was our first goal, being the fuel economy leader. Because I was getting so frustrated that we weren't moving fast enough on green issues. We were in a lot of our non-vehicle issues. I mean, we had very strong targets on water usage and recyclability and using recycled materials. And that's kind of a cool story nobody talks about. But in the last 10 years, we've cut our power usage, our water usage, both by about 50%. And we've cut our CO2 emissions by 50% too, in the way we make our vehicles. And that's all important. Nobody really focuses on that, but that was important to us. And about 85% of our vehicle today is recyclable, and we're pushing very hard to get to 100%. And we use a tremendous number of natural materials and recycled materials in our vehicles today, and we're shooting for we have an aggressive roadmap on that too. But a couple things were clear to me back then, and Alan saw it the same way when I brought it up to him. Number one, we had to get on with this and just go like hell. Number two, it certainly didn't see that oil was going to be easier to find in more geopolitically stable parts of the world. And if you remember back in '06, the price of gasoline was relatively low. But it really seemed to me that that was an aberration, and that over time it was going to march north. And Alan agreed. And if that were so, that we believe fuel economy was going to be the primary driver as a purchase decision for our customers. And as I say, Ford wasn't known for that. Now, having made that decision, you quickly leap into the technology, because you can't deliver that without technology. And so, so we started to talk about what delivering that vision would look like. And it was absolutely clear that we needed to double down on technology. But we were also working very hard at Ford to be known, even at that time, as the safety leader. But safety at that time was just about to transition from passive safety, which is how do I survive a crash, to active safety, which is how do I avoid a crash. And that was going to require a lot of new technology. So the fuel economy story and the safety story were both going to be driven by technology. And so that's really how we headed down this technology road. Was we knew to deliver the former, really the first two, fuel economy and safety, we had to be the leader in technology. But what's happened since then has been, I've really started studying kind of the mega trends, if you will, in terms of where the world was going. And it came clear to me that, and it really, I'll never forget, it was during it was a meeting I was in when they were projecting Chinese, Indian, developing sales, market sales for the next 10 years. And I started adding it all up. And I said, this isn't going to work. I mean, hopefully it's going to work that we get more cars out, because that's what we do. But if we just try and shove them out in our current form without thinking about all these other issues, we are going to create global gridlock. And then I started thinking, well, and a lot of smart people around Ford were thinking, okay, so what technology are we going to have to develop to avoid this? Because if you think about global gridlock, one of the things I said in Barcelona is, at a minimum, it's an inconvenience. If you're sitting, a lot of you remember there was an 11-day traffic jam in China two years ago, 11 days. And if that's the future, no thank you. So what are we going to do to make sure that isn't the future? Because at its best, it's an inconvenience. But at its worst, it's really a human rights issue. If you can't deliver food and health care in cities in a timely fashion, then it's no longer just an inconvenience. And so to me, this is a great challenge for us, but it's a great opportunity. And it's really cool, too, because it's bringing us to companies that exist, that all of you are part of and know well, in a way that we never have before. And I love it. I mean, we're, all the big companies out here, whether it's Facebook or, on the marketing side, or whether it's Apple and Google and obviously Microsoft, and, we're dealing with very non-traditional partners. And I think it's really neat.
And how culturally bound is this notion? Is it universal? Is it worldwide? Does everyone want this kind of vehicle with this kind of intelligence, or is this something?
I don't think they'd want it yet, because they haven't really thought about it. I mean, but I suspect they will when we get the technology right. And there's a difference between technology being technologically ready and being customer ready. Because to be customer ready, there's a lot of testing that has to go on, a lot of making that technology easy for the customer. I mean, again, that's got to be the end point. We've got to make sure that we never lose sight. We're doing all this for the customer. We're not doing it for technology's sake. And so there will always be a tension, I think, between some of our partners and ourselves, because they want to get the technology out now. And I completely get that. We got to make sure it's tested and safe, but also that it's intuitive and adds value for our customer. And so, but it's, we're going to go down this road together, and I think it's going to be really, really neat.
I'm going to just try to get your description of how the mobile industry reacted to the message that you sent in Barcelona.
Really well. because they completely understood where they could help here. And they completely understood that there's a big business opportunity for them if they get this right. So yeah, I mean, I think the mobile industry is really fired up to get going on this. Look, you think about the reach of an auto industry. 1 billion vehicles on the road going to 4 billion. That's a lot of business opportunity if you're a mobile company. And so they really want to help. And it's not just the mobile providers, it's all the tech providers. And so the reception we got was, I'd say, terrific. And what's really interesting is we're going to the same conferences now. I mean, our industries are coming together in a way. I'll never forget, a few years ago, I started going to green conferences. And some of the tech people would be there, and we had nothing to talk about. It was like we were in two different worlds. And we were talking about the things we were doing, and they were talking about the things they were doing. And if we happened to sit in each other's sessions, we usually were sort of daydreaming and playing on our phones and stuff. But that's all changing. It's very cool.
Let me ask you, I want to ask you one other question before we bring Paul up so we can talk about the Silicon Valley and sync piece of this.
Sure.
If a small company has a really killer idea that fits with your vision of what a mobile platform can be, how do they access a big company like Ford?
Well, that's one of the reasons we've got the Silicon Valley Lab, is it gives them an entry point into Ford. And it gives them a place to try out their idea. But importantly, it gives them a real human being who can fast track their idea if it makes sense, get it to Dearborn, make sure people see it, and make sure it goes through the process. So, that's, for people in the Valley, that's a really important function of this office. The other thing is, we're at every conference now. We have technical people out at all the startup conferences, the green festivals, I mean, all the places where smart entrepreneurial people show up, we're there too. And we're there to listen and hear their good ideas and to give them entry points into Ford Motor Company.
Great. All right, so let's bring Paul up. I mentioned before we're going to be joined by Paul Mascarenas, who is the Chief Technical Officer for Ford and Vice President of Ford Research and Innovation. The Silicon Valley operation is really partly Paul's baby, if not entirely his. So we're going to bring Paul up now. Paul, why don't you join us, and we'll take a few questions, and then we'll get to the Q&A from the audience. Welcome.
Thanks, John.
Good to have you here. Thanks.
Hey, Paul.
We talked a little bit earlier, Paul, about it's not only the work product of Silicon Valley, but it's sort of the vibe of being in the Valley. And Bill touched on it a minute ago, just being here and being a part of the swim of ideas and innovation. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it's connected to the labs?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, I think you guys had a great conversation. I mean, you hit on just about everything. And for us, it's about being part of what is undoubtedly the most innovative community in the world. And, speaking to you all as an audience, you know that. So the question is, why are we here? And the way I think about this, and I think, Bill, you kind of touched on it, is this convergence now. And it's actually interesting for me because a lot of these conversations are about the tech industry and the auto industry. And a lot of people actually don't realize just how much technology is already in our vehicles to deliver the fuel efficiency and the emissions and the safety and some of the other features and technologies. But there's really now been this convergence between the vehicle and the kind of home, Bill, you touched on it, the home, the office, the workplace, and the type of devices you enjoy. And I think the thing that really is different between our industries a little bit, and maybe one of the things that you didn't touch on, is this issue of clock speed. And as fast as we are in our industry, it's still a sheet metal business. And we measure our development cycles in years. Consumer electronics measure in months. We measure our ownership period in years. Typically consumer devices are a year to 18 months. If we look at the price that people are paying for the vehicles, ours are tens of thousands of dollars as opposed to the kind of hundreds of dollars. But things are really starting to converge now. So being here in the Valley, having a small office, giving ourselves a physical presence, part of the community, opportunity to build on our existing partnerships. Bill mentioned Microsoft, also Nuance as our voice partner, INRIX, Navtex, Telenav for some of the navigation services, the work that we do with Apple to ensure compatibility with the many devices they offer, working with Google and so on. It's really an opportunity to build on those partnerships, but at the same time also develop new relationships with some of the smaller companies, potentially startups and entrepreneurial individuals. And that's really why we're here. It's, we're open for business, we're open shop, and come talk to us.
Let's go back to the development of Sync for a minute. You talked about that as kind of a pivotal moment of introducing this technology to consumers as opposed to just the things that are invisible in the car. How did that happen? And talk about how Sync took you beyond sort of the basic, say, navigation and sort of rudimentary ways that cars talk to us many years ago, as opposed to the way the Sync technology works today. Can you talk about that?
Convergence again, and getting to know your customer, understanding the way that customers live their lives. Obviously, a proliferation in terms of cell phones and mobile devices, and sort of looking at, well, what is it that people want to do when they're in the vehicle? Clearly, they want to drive. They want to be able to drive safely. They want to be able to have some fun when they're driving. But at the same time, they want to be able to listen to music. They want to be able to make and receive telephone calls. The way that people listen to music now is very different. We've been through our 8 tracks and cassettes and CDs, and clearly now we're in a world of digital music. Most people have got phones. So the question was really, well, how do we enable them to continue to enjoy that experience in the vehicle, but to do it in a way that is as safe as it can possibly be? And Bill mentioned that term, hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. How do you enable that? Well, through voice. So the essence of Sync was to develop with Microsoft a platform that we call device agnostic. So it'll work with a Windows-based device, Android-based device, an iOS-based device. Allow the customer to easily connect up through Bluetooth, and then to enjoy an experience through the vehicle interface, which is both safe and high quality. So you can use the steering wheel controls, you can use the touch screen, but most importantly, use this voice engine to control the majority of the functions. And that was really the sort of gestation of this idea, how you can provide that seamless interface to your mobile device.
Given the strong partnership with Chinese car makers, what's Ford's strategy for the Chinese market, and could you give a profile of Chinese consumers who would purchase a Ford car?
Well, we're in China. We have very aggressive plans for China. We are adding products and plants there at a breathtaking rate. We started a little slower than others in China, so we've got some catch up to do. We have a great partner. Our industry requires, each sector of the economy is different. Our sector, the auto sector, requires a 50-50 joint venture, and we have that with a very good partner in Western China, in Chongqing. And you asked about the Chinese customer. Ultimately, they're not so different than any other customer. They want great value, great technology, but what is different is for many of them, it's the first car they've ever owned, and so there are a lot of accidents driving out of the dealership because it's the first time they've ever gotten behind the wheel. But it's and it's very interesting because it's the first car they've ever bought. The whole family is involved in the buying experience. It's a different dynamic, but ultimately what they're looking for really isn't any different than customers anywhere else in the world.
This is not a region-specific question, but it's an interesting question, which is, will the car of the future mean there may be no more bad drivers? Is your vision of safety so all-encompassing that the elimination of bad drivers, or at least bad driving,
I think what we can do with technology is actually a great question, and it's something that we talk a lot about. But with the technologies that we're putting in our vehicles, driver assistance and active safety, so things like blind spot monitoring, lane keeping assist, forward collision warning, we've got low-speed city braking. What we can do is improve the average driving standard. So there'll always be drivers that are better than other drivers, but our goal is to improve the average, and as we improve the average standard, clearly we can improve road safety.
Is it an intervention model? Is the safety part of it supposed to intervene when I make a mistake so that I don't really cause something terrible to happen?
It depends on the technology. So for example, blind spot monitoring or blind spot indication will give you a warning. The lane keeping assist feature that we're launching on our new Fusion vehicle will actually correct the steering if you start to drift off of the road. Adaptive cruise control, for example, controls speed and distance to the vehicle that you're following. So it depends on the technology, combination of warning and actual interaction with the driver.
This is a great question that I get all the time in other contexts, and I'm so glad to get the opportunity to ask it of you.
Oh, great.
As an educator in the K-12 system, what can I do to encourage innovative thinking among my students?
You know, it's really, I think, and I didn't come here to make a plug for your facility, but I'll do it because I think the more you can inspire young people by showing them what other people have done, it's really powerful. I mean, we have, I mentioned this museum that we have in Michigan, the Henry Ford Museum. Some of you may have been there and some of you may know of it. It was really started by my great-grandfather to celebrate his friend Thomas Edison. It was his lifelong friend, and so he brought out his workshops and a lot of his inventions to Dearborn, and then quickly added people like George Washington Carver, Luther Burbank, Harvey Firestone, and a lot of the great, Noah Webster, brought their homes. The Wright Brothers cycle shop is there. I mean, and so what's really cool though is to go through there and watch kids go through, because they just think it's so awesome to see how somebody who was just a kid like they were could literally change the world by doing. It's one thing to read about it, it's another thing to touch the stuff, see it, interact with it, and they can do that here too. And I think, as an educator, it's, as you all know, every kid responds differently. Some will read a book and get it, others have to go experience it. But so I think getting out and coming to a place like this is really a powerful thing, because it can really help put in context for kids what's possible. It's just my opinion.
Great answer. This is a very specific question from someone who clearly has a specific car in mind.
Okay, it's for you then.
When can we expect the release of your all-electric GT Cobra Mustang?
I think that's for you.
Yeah. I may have written that, actually.
Yeah. It looks like that may be your handwriting there.
I say dream on.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a little while. To have a 600 horsepower electric vehicle, you might be able to get from here to the end of the room on the range. But as batteries get better and the technology develops, you never say never. I must say I average my guilt by having a bunch of Mustangs, and I have the first production electric vehicle also. So, someday you'll be able to have it all in one vehicle, but we're a little ways away from that.
Let me ask just one more question, and then I want to talk about sync, and then I want to give you the final question, Bill. The final question from the audience I want to ask is, you're obviously one of the most heavily regulated industries all over the world. So as you make these changes in cars, how are you solving for that regulatory problem on a global basis?
Well, I think a lot of it's education. We spend a lot of time bringing department heads of various governments into our labs. I mean, Paul, you've probably done a ton of show and tells for government officials at all levels, from the cabinet level right on down through the new hires. And we encourage that because, they're sitting in Washington or Brussels or wherever, and, they don't necessarily understand what we're doing. And if they do, and if they even kind of get it, all they can think of are the negative implications. So, part of our job is to educate them and to invite them out and show them what we're doing and tell them why we're doing it and why this is making the world a better place. But it's a very valid point. We, you know, I was going to say we waste a lot of time. We spend a lot of time doing it. And I know you've spent more of your time than you probably would like to.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can talk a little bit. I mean, we do spend a lot of time with the rule makers around the world, and clearly there we're working towards harmonization, because as many of these standards and regs as we can harmonize, it makes our lives easier. But I'd also give you an example of where smart engineering, and in this case, mechanical engineering, not electronics. But if you think a few years back to the imports from Europe and the big standoffs on the bumpers and how ugly those cars look to meet the low-speed damageability requirements and so on. Take examples now of our new Focus, the Escape, you know, right outside here. They look exactly the same in every market around the world. They look exactly the same, but they meet very different requirements. So again, smart engineering can actually solve some of these, but we can help ourselves with harmonization. It saves us engineering 2 or 3 different solutions.
That's great. Paul, you and your team very generously have donated one of the early sync devices to the museum. We've got it on display this evening downstairs in the main lobby. I hope you'll take a minute to go down there and see it. You want to talk a little bit about what that is and why you've donated it?
Absolutely honoured, first of all, to be recognised here in the Computer History Museum. And, you know, for me, I look back at the history of our company, and, you know, I've often been to the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, and you see the kind of legacy and the memorabilia of our company over 100 years of history. But I think for me and the team that worked to develop Sync, including our partners at Microsoft, to actually be recognised in the Computer History Museum just 4 or so years after we launched it just feels great. So thanks, John, for the recognition and inducting us in here. I talked a little bit earlier about the sort of the original concept behind Sync, and it was this concept of convergence and letting people bring their device into the vehicle, seamlessly connect, and then use voice to drive safely, but at the same time play music, take voice calls, and so on. We work with Microsoft to develop that, and we've got several of our Microsoft colleagues in the audience, so thanks to you and your teams, and congratulations to the Microsoft partnership as well, and a number of other partners to bring that to market. And I think probably the thing that is of most importance here is how we actually brought it to market. Bill used the term the democratization of technology, which for us means making it affordable, making it accessible to literally millions of customers around the world. With Sync, our go-to-market strategy was to introduce it on our most affordable car at the time, which was the Ford Focus. We priced it then at less than $400. It's now even less than, considerably less than that. And what I was talking to John about, just as we were getting ready for the interview, was what we found on the kind of first 6 to 12 months of sales, where our dealers were not sure about this new technology, this new Sync, so they were kind of hedging their bets. They were ordering some cars with and some cars without. It was amazing how much more quickly the cars that were equipped with Sync were selling. And the feedback that we got in terms of customer sat, in terms of reasons that people bought the vehicle, their willingness to recommend to family or friends. So really building on that helped us, first of all, use scale to drive the cost down, to put it on more vehicles. We've already now sold over 4 million vehicles equipped with Sync, and we were talking about our rollout plan for Europe this year, with many more languages. I think we've got about 19 different languages in Europe, and going to Asia Pacific as well. So truly a democratized technology, accessible, affordable, and available to millions of customers around the world.
Well, thanks for your generosity as well for donating that. We're really proud to have it here. We'll
thanks again.
Proudly show it alongside the Philco 212 computer. I'm sure there's a sort of genetic relationship there that we all want to discover. One final question for you, Bill. I just imagine if it were possible for Henry Ford to come back and visit us all for 12 hours, if you could bring him to Silicon Valley for a day, what would you show him? What would you be most excited to show him? And what do you think his reaction would be?
Well, first of all, he would love the fact that we are what we call democratizing technology. We're trying to, when we get new technology, we don't want to put it on one vehicle and make it expensive. We want to put it on all our vehicles and drive the cost down, because we feel that's our heritage, and that's something that he did. I mean, he didn't invent the car, but what he did was he made it available to the average person so they could afford a car. And that is a very compelling vision, even in this completely different world that we're in today, called the high-tech world. If we can stay true to that vision and really democratize technology in the way that he did with his original vehicles, I think he'd love that. I think he'd love the fact it's still a family company. You know, it's interesting. I was talking to the tech shop guys before, and he probably would have started in tech shop today rather than, because if he had, he would have saved himself quite an embarrassment, because what happened was, so he was working for Edison Lighting at the time when he was developing his first vehicle, and he was building it in his garage because they didn't have tech shop, So, you know, it's driving his wife crazy because he was, you know, hammering and banging stuff around all night. And finally, the big moment came for him to drive the vehicle and show all his friends, and they were all outside waiting, except the garage door wasn't big enough to go through. So he had to take a sledgehammer, knock down half of his house before he could drive the vehicle out. And I think I kind of like that determination. But so had he had tech shop, he would have been saved that embarrassment. But I think he would love where we're headed as an industry, because he was always very restless in terms of the status quo. He always wanted to keep pushing new frontiers, new boundaries. You know, he experimented with stuff that, you know, people thought were crazy. I mean, he made a whole vehicle out of soybeans because he thought soy could not only feed the world, but that they could use it in industrial applications. He was always playing around with new materials, new things. So the fact that we're now going into a brave new world called technology and dealing with the best and the brightest out here, I think for him, he probably would have said, what took you so long?
Yeah. Bill, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Paul, thank you for joining us as well. It's been a terrific evening.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. That was great. Thanks.
Bill Ford, the great-grandson of the legendary Henry Ford, understands that the company's legacy depends in part on bridging the past to the future. Making that connection is what we do here at the Computer History Museum. Please join us next time for another episode of Revolutionaries.